flow.
Welcome to episode 32 of the Gluttons For Punishment Podcast, or GFP, a Toronto Maple Leafs and NHL podcast hosted by Michael Lepore and Anthony Bruno. He's Lepore, I'm Bruno. Thank you so much for listening and watching us on YouTube as well. If you're a new listener and you enjoy the show, we would really appreciate it if you give us a 5-star rating and review on Apple. And if you're watching us on YouTube and you enjoy the content, it would be a big time help if you smash the like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell so you know exactly when the GFP podcast is posting some new content. All right. As of Wednesday, August 18th, 2021, we are in the dog days of summer right now. There's not too much going on in the NHL, but this is going to be a great episode because we are going to talk NHL contracts. We are going to get into an article written by Luszczyszyn of The Athletic, who ranked teams by the value of their contracts. And we're going to get into the ins and outs and kind of how he ranked all these teams. But before we do that, it is time to welcome in my partner in crime, Mr. Michael Lepore. How you doing, man?
I'm doing well, Anthony Bruno. Very excited to be back. Like you said, it's the dog days of summer. I always say, it's a slow season when you put on SportsCenter and the first 20 minutes are dedicated to CFL. But here we are. We're going to talk NHL contracts, episode 32 of the GFP podcast. Shout out to Steve Thomas, who in 2000 against the Ottawa Senators, Game 5, scored the overtime winner. And if anyone out there has some time, go on YouTube and watch that overtime because it was an absolute blast of back and forth action, missed chances, off the post, this and that. And a little bit nostalgic to go back to a time when the Toronto Maple Leafs actually won playoff series. So have fun with that, everyone.
Yeah, man. Stumpy's the best. I remember his son is like close to my age. And every time we'd be at the rink, hockey tournaments or just regular season games or whatever, he'd always be there and everyone would always be like, oh, there's Steve Thomas. He's on the glass. And he'd just be like kind of chilling by himself. But like everyone used to just love that dude.
Oh, what a playoff player. Like, I think he had like 5 goals in that series or something. Just what a guy.
Yeah, great player. Yeah, so shout out to Steve Thomas. But Lepore, it is time to jump right into this episode. And like I mentioned, we're going to go over NHL contracts. One other thing I should mention, stay tuned for the end of this podcast because we are going to talk about the Leafs Amazon documentary, All or Nothing. And we're going to give our initial take on that.
Yeah.
The series does not drop until October 1st, but we're going to get into that a little bit. But Lepore, let's begin here with these NHL contracts. Okay. So if you don't follow him on Twitter, Luszczyszyn, he's one of the big voices in the hockey analytics community. He's a writer for The Athletic, and he wrote a piece ranking the teams that have the best contracts in the NHL. So basically what he did was look at what you're paying certain players, how much value are you getting from them over the length of their contracts. Now, this doesn't include goalies. It doesn't include players on entry-level contracts, and it doesn't include restricted free agents without a deal. So, for example, guys like Brady Tkachuk on the Senators, who's a restricted free agent right now, has yet to get his new contract.
Right.
So going over the rankings, I'll just run through the top 5 real quick. So he has the Colorado Avalanche at number 1.
Shocking.
The Florida Panthers at number 2. And then your Toronto Maple Leafs at number 3. Number 4 is the Boston Bruins, and rounding out the top 5 is the Vegas Golden Knights.
Yep.
So Lepore, let's start with the Toronto Maple Leafs. And I think a lot of people would probably be surprised by their ranking here.
Yeah.
Being 3rd on this list, because everyone loves to make fun of the Leafs, saying how they're paying, $40.5 million to Matthews, Marner, Tavares, and Nylander. And they're going to be in all this cap trouble because they're paying those guys too much. And it's a disaster. And Matthews is going to go to Arizona and on and on and on, Lepore.
Yeah, it's always fun.
But what is your initial take here on the Toronto Maple Leafs being third on this list?
To be honest, I'm not that shocked that the Leafs were ranked that high, simply because I've always pointed to the Leafs and said, okay, show me who a bad deal is. And people are already responding saying Mitch Marner, John Tavares. And I think that's more on the side of the argument of how the Leafs are built. And I'll listen to that argument about, okay, they'd be better off spending that money in depth or on D. But in terms of the individual player and in Dom Luszczyszyn's model, that player's wins above replacement, I look at these deals and like, yeah, I agree with them for the most part. But again, reminder everyone, before you go nuts in the comment section, because we're destroying the contracts on your favorite team. These are Dom Luszczyszyn's models, not Bruno and I's models. So keep that in mind, everyone. So starting at the top, Austin Matthews, he had Matthews at an amazing contract, like an unbelievable contract. 3 years left on the deal. He has him at a surplus of $17.7 million. So quick math. And again, like we'll get to different players and how like he shows the model and like the value that player can hold. He is Matthews valued at $17 million ish. So like in his model, you could be paying Austin Matthews $17 million and that's a fair deal. So it's kind of funny. And I think it goes to show with like, it kind of represents how his model works in the way that it clearly pushes offense. Like guys who get points, guys who score goals. And again, perspective, like Matthews was pushing, did he have a 60 goal pace last year?
Yeah,
it's
65 like, goal pace.
Yeah, there you go. So like you look at today's NHL, if there was a free agent who was a 30 to 35 goal guy, guaranteed, it's like, yeah, he would get like in the $7-8 million, like no doubt. And then it's like to say Matthews is double that kind of represents like Luszczyszyn's model. Going down, even Mitch Marner, get ready for the controversy, everyone. Exactly. So Marner, he had him as a surplus of 11.5 million spread over 4 years. That works out to about just under 3 million a year. So he had Marner at about 13.75 million in terms of value. And again, everyone going crazy. Mitch Marner was 4th in the league in scoring and was a first team all-star. So in today's NHL, you pay for points. That's just the world we live in.
And that's another thing, Lepore. I don't think this model takes into account any of your playoff stats.
No, he actually go ahead.
It's all regular season numbers. So yeah, so people freaking out saying that Marner has 1 goal in his last 18 playoff games or whatever the hell it is, like that is not being taken into consideration in this model.
Yeah. And he actually made the point in his little write-up about the Leafs saying how Matthews and Marner are both on amazing deals based on their production, but based on their playoff production, it's like, well, it's terrible. Like he acknowledged that if this was a playoff model, it's absolutely terrible. And you can't really argue with that. But moving down, he has as the 3rd best contract on the Toronto Maple Leafs, our boy, our favorite, Jason Spezza. He has Spezza let's go. He has, and again, this is where you get value from a team. And this is where I like point to teams and say, wow, this is how you build a team that can contend. He has Spezza based on his model at a $1.8 million surplus. The guy's making league min. So he has Jason Spezza in and around $2.5 million to get a fair deal based on what he brings in terms of like wins. And
that makes sense.
Yeah. It's
especially based on what he did last year. I think he was like 3rd in the league in 5-on-5 points per 60 minutes. Crazy. It was like McDavid, Brad Marchand, and Jason Spezza, number 3. Insane.
Spezza. Gotta love him. This one shocked me. The next one really shocked me. And what popped into my head with this one is a lot of these guys, when they do their advanced stats models or metrics models, they don't take into account, or they can't really take into account talent. So like they see these models that say, okay, this guy creates this many chances for, he's on the ice for this many chances against, wins, losses tied to his production. But again, like a player getting 10 breakaways versus another player getting 10 breakaways, it's hard for them within the model to say, okay, this player will score 6 times, this player will score 3 times. And I think that may have come into play here because he is as the next best contract on the Toronto Maple Leafs as far as forwards go as Ilya Mikheyev. He has Mikheyev as a $1.6 million surplus on his deal. And I was like, okay. And like I said, maybe he doesn't take into account like a talent model or like a shooting model. Like I know moneypuck.com, when you watch the deserve a win-a-meter thing, it's based on average shooting numbers. So like people will say like, okay, I don't know, Detroit outplayed Colorado 55-45. Yeah, but Colorado doesn't need as many shots to score as Detroit does. So I'd like to know like how this model broke down, like as far as like a player like Mikheyev goes, where it's like, well, if you put in his shooting talent, like it's not looking as good.
Yeah, and that could be a blind spot in the model, in any model really, right? Because it's more, it's not just, it's an art and a science. Right. And anyone who's watched the Toronto Maple Leafs, you know that Ilya Mikheyev, his finishing ability is quite frankly trash, honestly.
Horrible. Like I wouldn't invite him to my Friday morning pickup hockey.
Like that dude, he can have all the breakaways in the world. Like you give Ilya Mikheyev 10 breakaways. I think, honestly, I wouldn't be confident that he's scoring more than one goal. On 10 breakaways.
And what's the over-under on hitting the net? Maybe 5 or 6.
Yeah. So he's like, and that's the thing, right? So those are the things you have to kind of take into consideration in this model as well.
Yeah.
And these rankings, I should say.
The next one he has, and again, see, the Leafs are so fun to talk about because I can feel the comment down below, everybody. I can feel the comments coming in. The next best one at a $2.7 million surplus over 3 years is our boy, William Nylander.
I love it, Lepore.
I love it. He makes a point, right? William Nylander is a first line forward in the NHL. And I remember correctly, he has him like at his value. You'd be getting fair value at 7.5 to 8 million a year. And he's making 6.9. So again, it's a nice one for the Leafs. And like the joke, as much as your uncle hates William Nylander, it's a good player. Sorry, guys.
Yeah, Lepore, have you noticed that all that chatter about, I mean, I shouldn't say it's totally gone, the trade Nylander chatter, but just like the, people ripping this guy and saying he's overpaid and all this crap. You notice how that's quieted down, especially over the last year, and especially seeing how he performed in the playoffs against Montreal.
He was the only guy scoring in the playoffs against Montreal. But no, great. But what I would say about Nylander too is like, and again, how how quickly you become spoiled. Think of how many teams, like, I'm not saying you don't think of William Nylander as like a star player on the Toronto Maple Leafs, but he's kind of like in Group B. Whereas on how many teams, like, no, he's hard Group A, like first liner. Again, like the Toronto Maple Leafs, facts are facts. They have a first team All-Star in Marner and a second team All-Star in Matthews, who's only behind McDavid. So to be like the third or fourth best forward is like pretty friggin' good on that team. Whereas other teams would give their left nut for a William Nylander 30 goal scorer, right?
Yeah.
So.
And now looking at some of the contracts that have been handed out, and I know this offseason was just ridiculous in terms of the money defensemen we're getting, but even seeing what some of the forwards have gotten, like honestly, William Nylander at 6.9 million. Looking pretty damn good.
Yeah. Yeah. Moving down, we'll go to D now. And this one is worth talking about because this is going to be the chatter all over Leafland for the next little while. Morgan Rielly. And I can, again, Bruno, I can feel the comments coming. I can feel them
flooded in, Lepore.
They're coming in. Luszczyszyn put Rielly at a $4.3 million surplus with 1 year to go on his deal. That puts his value, according to his model, in and around $9 million. That's like A+ D man money. So have your take, everyone. I mean, we're gonna have to there's a lot of discussions on like the re-signing of Morgan Rielly, how much he deserves, how much time he should get. But according to this model, anyway, right now the Leafs are getting an absolute steal with that player.
All right. So Lepore, looking at the contracts that Seth Jones got, Darnell Nurse, Zach Werenski, Cale Makar. And I know Makar, he's only like 22. He's the youngest guy of that group.
And he's another planet too. So.
Exactly. And he's just like, he's that dude's insane. He's an alien. He's probably he's going to be the best defenseman in the NHL for probably the next 5 years, if not longer. But Lepore, would you give Morgan Rielly a similar contract? Like, would you hand out a $9 million contract to Morgan Rielly?
No.
Neither would I.
No, you can't. And like the guys you mentioned too, like all good defensemen, but the only one of those contracts I would want would be Makar because of his age. it's like Nurse. It's like, I don't know, man. The Nurse one's loaded. Like he's young as well. But like looking, you mentioned Werenski and like other defensemen on the league and what they're getting. I just think you can get better value than like Morgan Riley at $9 million. And let's face it, at a $9 million AAV, there's got to be term attached to it. So it's like, what does that deal look like in a few years? And then there's also the matter of they're still saying the cap ain't going up, Bruno. So how do the Leafs just keep a player and add $3.5 million to his salary?
Yeah, it's really tough. But you want to know something that's interesting? You know that Darnell Nurse is just 1 year younger than Morgan Riley.
It's funny because as I was saying it, I'm like, wait a second, how old is Nurse? Yeah, because he signed a bridge. Am I right about that?
Yeah, I believe he signed. I think he signed somewhere like his current contract is like in the 5 million range. I want to say.
Yeah, that rings a bell.
Let me go double check that real quick. Yeah, so Darnell Nurse, yeah, like he's making 5.6 at the moment. So he signed a 2-year contract for 11.2 million.
Yeah.
That was his bridge deal, and now he's getting this. And yeah, he's only a year younger than Morgan Riley. So like right now, Morgan Riley is, let me just double check. He's 27 years
27,
old.
Yeah, I think
he turns 28 in March of this coming season. So, it feels like Morgan Riley has been around forever because the dude made his debut when he was like 19 or whatever.
Yeah, he came out of camp and he made the team.
Yeah,
Remember
it was crazy. So,
crazy.
Yeah, I mean, but no, I'm right there with you, man. Like, I'm not paying Morgan Riley in that ballpark. I think Morgan Riley certainly deserves somewhere probably in the $7 million range. And I know a lot of Leaf fans, I don't know, there's sometimes like there's this negative sentiment around Morgan Riley and how like he's just not good. And he doesn't deserve, like, this is a really good defenseman in the NHL. And based on what we've seen a lot of these guys get in the offseason, the market now for these D-men is going up. And yeah, I think Morgan Riley is certainly going to get somewhere in the $7 million range on the open market.
Yeah, and like people put him on in their Canada lineups, like not slam dunk every time, but you see his name dabbled around those Team Canada lineups for the next Olympics. But yeah, it's just like the numbers, like it's simple math. And I don't think the Leafs could afford it, like even if they wanted to. And then even then, like, and he's going to get term. So he's like, he's 27 turning 28. What's Riley going to look like at 33? You know what I mean? And I think to your point, but like the criticism Riley gets, something I've always said is I find that people are very quick to point to puck moving defensemen and complain because it's also, oh, defensive efficiencies. It's like, well, the guy who can skate like the wind, who can also stick handle and rush the puck and contribute offensively. If he was also A+ defensively, he'd be a $15 million player. Like you can't have it at all. And like, I remember there was a time it was like the Leafs had McCabe, the Habs had Surrey, like Vancouver had Jovanovski. It was like every Canadian team had like that guy who like puts up points, like is a good player, but the fans just like shit on them because like they do have that, again, because of their talent. Sometimes they think they can do too much and they make a horrible mistake. Like Karlsson, man, like watching all the Sens games here, Karlsson used to make crazy mistakes all the time, like horrible giveaway, but that's what you get with him. And he was still an incredible player and won Norris trophies and had incredible
you live with it because his ceiling is like literally best offensive defenseman in the NHL.
Yeah. So
and I'm not saying Riley's in that same league, but he has the ability to make plays that maybe only like 10 to 12 defensemen in the league can make.
Yeah. And the whole thing, and I'm sure this ties into Dom's model, like how it's the big scoring players that he's saying deserve all the money. Again, it's because when they're on the ice, the puck's in the other end. Like if
simple as that.
Yeah, like if the Leafs could play align with Matthews, Marner, Nylander, and Riley all game, they would do it and they would go pretty well undefeated because the puck is always in the other team's end. And people say, oh, they're not good defensively. It doesn't matter because the puck's always
they don't have to be good. Their defense is literally their offense.
Exactly. And that's where these guys tie in. Like people say, oh, who's the best defensive player in the league? Connor McDavid. Because when he's on the ice, the puck's in the other team's blue line, so their team can't score. And like that ties, and that's a big thing in advanced stats. It's like where the puck is. And I think people kind of like the new school, some of the new school fans or some of the old school fans, I should say, kind of fail to get that.
I totally agree with you, because I think even like going back to this defenseman conversation, it's like we all want our number one defenseman to be like Chris Pronger in his prime, or even like Victor Hedman for that matter, who's not even like nearly as physical as Chris Pronger used to be. But it's like, look at guys like no one talks about Duncan Keith. And I know I've talked about Duncan Keith being washed up on the last podcast, but going back to his prime, he was winning cups with the Blackhawks. Like, he's not a big guy. He's like 6 feet, like barely 190 pounds. Like, he's a small dude, skates like the wind, he makes plays, runs the power play. Like, that's the new age defenseman, right? Even like Cale Makar, it's not like he's this overly physical guy, right? So I think a lot of people, that just have that in their minds. It's like, if my number one defenseman can't throw a hit, then he sucks and I'm not paying him anything. Yeah. That's kind of the way that people think. So
there's also the thing too, and I talk about it as well with center backs in soccer. Say the Leafs get scored on and they'll see Riley in front of the net. And it's like, oh, it's Riley. It's always him. It's like, well, he plays defense. So when the other team scores, it's going to be a defenseman like in front of the net. Like it's the sport. Sorry, guys. But
yeah, people fail to put things into context, especially when like guys are on, like sometimes a guy is on the ice and his team gets scored on and it's not even remotely his fault.
Yeah.
That his team got scored on. But
yeah, we'll quickly run through the rest of the Leafs defensemen worth talking about. Muzzin, 3 years left on his deal. He has him at a $5 million surplus. According to Luszczyszyn's model, Muzzin could be in around the $7 million range for what he contributes again. And he loved Toronto's D. Like, according to him, like Toronto's getting an incredible amount of value from their D. And Brody, he had Brody at a $2.1 million surplus over 3 years. So a little bit of a raise, like around $5.5 million from what he currently gets. But I think that kind of, again, goes into Dom's model that like Brody doesn't produce offensively. So he's not going to be that bananas guy that he sees as crazy, insane value, because he doesn't really contribute offensively. It's just his role. The negatives, like 2 negatives that jumped out to me, and one's not that shocking. The other one I was like semi-shocked. First one is Kerfoot. He has Kerfoot in the hole, like 2.6 million over his 2 years. So according to his model, Kerfoot's about a $2 million player and he's making like 3.5. So fair. I mean, again, and again, to your point, Bruno, what you were saying before about pay the stars, pay the guys at the top. It's those guys that kill you. Like, you look around the league to the teams who have a hard time being successful, they have like 4 or 5 Kerfoots. And it's like, yeah, because if they're all paid by Dom's model, if they're all paid in that range over what they deserve, yeah, now you got a problem. Now you're in a $6 million deficit. So
yeah, and that's the thing, right? Like, everyone likes to make fun of the Leafs and, you know, saying that they pay their top 4 guys all this money, but honestly, that's probably the best way to do it, because the other way to do it is like the New York Islanders model. So you're either going like sort of stars and scrubs like the Leafs do, and even like, I mean, Colorado's kind of in a different ballpark. They're ranked number 1, but mostly because McKinnon is still on a ridiculous contract. Yeah. And even Mikko Rantanen, in the deal that he signed for $9.5 million, he's underpaid according to Dom's model. But it's like, you either pay your elite guys the big money, the money that they deserve and that they would get on the open market, or you do like what the New York Islanders have done and you pay like everyone on your roster $5 million.
Yeah.
But that can get you into trouble as well. And then, you know, I've talked about the Islanders countless times. It's like, what's the ceiling of a team like that when your entire roster is making $5 million? And I know, you know, they have a star like Matt Barzal, for example, who deserves more than that. And I'd have to look at his contract right now. But that's the thing, right? It's like, yes, am I outraged by the Kerfoot contract? No, not at all. But I'd rather have this Leafs model where you're paying the top guys what they deserve, and then you fill out the rest with cheap value guys. I really think that's probably the best way to do it.
Like, to anyone who wants to argue against that, what I would ask them this, and it's a total discussion. Again, comment down below. What's easier to get? Is it easier to get a player at $1 million or $2 million who maybe deserves like that 2.5 to 3.5 million, or to get like a $5 million guy who deserves like 7 or 8. The lower guy's way easier to find. Like you can get value. There's a lot of talent like around the world when it comes to hockey players. Like you can get value there. The other thing is entry level deals. It's like, again, you can pay guys if you're developing and you're spitting guys out of your system and they're on, you get 2 or 3 years of entry level out of them. Again, incredible. And that's where it's like that. And that's where you can afford to pay the guys at the top, because you could have a 20 goal scorer at $850,000. And I actually think that doesn't get talked about enough with the Leafs, that over the last few years, in terms of like players coming through the Marley draft and then the Marley system, like who we could get like on a league min deal, and that would really help us cap wise, hasn't really happened. Like we'll see how it's kind of coming through now a little bit. We're seeing, because Robertson will probably be in the lineup and Sandin will probably be in the lineup. But I think that's kind of been like what's missing with the Leafs from going to like that next level. Like, yeah, I'd say now they're like, second group contender, to like, if you flutter in 2 or 3 guys on entry level deals beyond the value they have, and now it's okay, now it's next level, right? And that's hard to do. Like that really is hard to do. I just think that's the difference between like the teams in that second group and that teams like in that 1A group of contenders.
Yeah, that's fair. And that's why I think a lot of people were upset that the Leafs didn't go further, going back to like the seasons that they played Boston in the first round, where Matthews and Marner were still on their entry level contracts, right? And they could afford guys like James Van Riemsdyk. And I'm not saying that James Van Riemsdyk is a star, but to already have like star players in place who are at the end of their entry level contracts and being able to supplement them with guys like JVR, for example, up front, and some of the other forwards the Leafs had, even like Nazem Kadri, for example.
Yeah.
It's almost like the conversation about having like that star quarterback in the NFL on a rookie contract, and being able to pay all these other skill position players and being able to pay your defense and things like that. But yeah, like right now, it's the Leafs haven't had, you're right, Lepore, like there hasn't been that next guy step up after that wave of all, the young stars that came up, like Matthews and Marner and Nylander. Like there hasn't been that next wave of guys that are taking that next step on their entry level contracts. But like you said, maybe we're going to see that this season with guys like Nick Robertson and Rasmus Sandin.
Yeah, hopefully anyway. Last but not least, in the red for the Toronto Maple Leafs, your captain, John Tavares. So that there's the joke for everyone. There's the joke everyone can throw at the Leafs. Their captain was in the red. JT's got 4 years left on his deal. Luszczyszyn had him at a $6.4 million overpay over the 4 years. So he has Tavares, like quick math, in around like a $9 million player, and he's making 11. So
I think that makes sense.
That's fair. Yeah. At 9 million, it's like, yeah, that JT be pretty, like, that's fair at 9 million. We'd be pretty happy with that right now. So I'm okay with Luszczyszyn shitting on the Tavares contract a little bit.
Yeah, no, I have no issue with that, because, we've talked about this before on the show. When you're paying a guy in free agency, you have to overpay.
Yeah.
And at the time, we all knew, as good as John Tavares was when the Leafs signed him, that it was an overpay at the time. And again, it's not like it's a huge overpay, but it would look a little bit nicer if he signed a 7-year, $9 million AAV as opposed to a 7 times 11, right? It would just look a little bit better, especially in terms of what's happening with the salary cap right now. It's a flat cap, especially for the next couple of years, I believe it is. So
yeah, I think too, what helps the value of that deal, and I'm going to sound like a Leafs homer here, is that it gives you that second center. So it's like, if you're a team that was in desperate need of a number 1 center and you had this deal, it could end up being, I say really bad, but like, it doesn't look that good. But the fact that like it creates a 2-headed monster helps the value of that. And that can't go into the model, but I think you know where I'm going with that idea.
Yeah, no, 100%. And that's the thing, right? It's like, if you want to get an elite center to join Austin Matthews as your 1-2 punch and have that as the foundation of your team, you got to pay for that sort of stuff, right?
Yeah.
So it really is as simple as that.
Yeah. Time to move on. We'll kill the other Canadian teams.
Yeah, man. I think we can probably move on. Like, there's really nothing else to go through. Like I said, this these rankings and Dom's model, it does include goalies,
Right.
players on entry-level contracts, unsigned RFAs. So it's basically just the players that are currently under contract on the roster right now. And yeah, I mean, for the most part, I happen to agree with Dom. Like I'm not in 100% agreement with him on some of the things in his model, but pretty close to 100%. And I have no issue at all with the Leafs being this high, especially looking at some of the other teams in the top 5. When you look at Colorado and Florida, and again, those are teams that have been blessed by getting guys like McKinnon and Huberdeau and Barkov on these like insane value contracts before all these other teams in the NHL started dishing out all this ridiculous money to these young stars coming off their ELCs. So yeah, I think the Leafs are honestly right where they should be in terms of these rankings.
Yeah, I'm okay with it. And again, you mentioned the goalies. I mean, you said before Florida's ranked second. They got that Bobrovsky deal, and the Leafs have pretty good value from their goalies right now. So maybe the Leafs would get bumped to second. I don't know, but show us results, Leafs.
Yeah, because if Florida adds in that, if you actually include the Bobrovsky contract in this model, Florida's like outside the top 10 in terms of like contract value and efficiency.
Yeah, no doubt. No, I'd love to see that actually, like the red, like the overpaid total, and like the red going for like every year on like his article. But anyways, so yeah, we'll move on then. The next best Canadian team Dom had was Daryl Sutter's Calgary Flames at the 12th best team in the league contract wise. We'll just fire through quickly. He has Lindholm at like an amazing deal. He has him at $7.9 million surplus over the 3 years, saying he deserves in around that $7 to $7.5 million mark. The next best one he had was our boy Paisan Manjapane. He had him at a $4.2 million surplus. He's only got 1 year left on his deal, I believe. And then again, this one actually shocked me a bit, not necessarily because I don't think he's a really good player. It was more about the deal. Matthew Tkachuk. He had him at a $2.5 million surplus. Like he had him value wise in around $9 million. And like that's one of those ones, like that seems like a lot for a player like that. But
that's
I don't know.
Too much.
You think that's too much? Like I don't know. Like if I guess it depends how you look at it too. Like if he was a free agent, would he get $9 million?
You know what? He probably would,
but which doesn't make it a good deal. But
yeah, I mean, exactly. Yeah. I don't think it makes it a good deal, but he had a little bit of an off year last year, and you go through the coaching change with Daryl Sutter, and Daryl Sutter cut his ice time. It was a pretty big cut in ice time as well. Like all those stars saw their ice time drop on Calgary. But yeah, like when you look at what Matthew Tkachuk did, especially a couple of years ago, 34 goals, 77 points. Then he had 61 points in 69 games in 2020. Like
that's a lot though, Bruno. Like 61 points in 69 games.
He's a good player.
That gets you paid. He
brings all those other things to the table, right? Like he's your rare guy that can put up points and score goals, but can also, get his nose dirty and throw hits and be physical. So I get why he'd be valued this high. And again, I don't think Dom's model is looking at like this guy throws 3 hits per 60 minutes or whatever. Like, I don't think it's looking at anything like that, but
it just shows in the results on the ice, right? I'm sure that's what Dom's looking at.
Yeah. And when you look at everything he brings to the table. So yeah, I can see why he's valued that high, but personally, I would not pay a guy like Matthew Tkachuk.
That's a lot. That's a lot for a player like that. The next one, he had him in the green. And I thought this one could go either way. It was Johnny Gaudreau. He had him at a $2.3 million surplus, and he had him, if I remember correctly, the quick math I did was like between 8.5 and 9 million. As like fair value for Johnny Gaudreau.
That's going to be polarizing for
and I mean, especially with like how his production's gone down. Like his scoring's gone down. It was like 2 years ago. Did he hit 80 points?
Before he was a 99 point player.
There you go. Yeah, you're right.
Ago.
Yeah, you're right. No, I remember.
Let me double check that. Yeah, he had 99 points in 82 games in 2018, 2019.
There you go.
But then the last 2 years, like you said. So last year he bounced back 49 points in 56 games. The year before that, though, only 58 points in 70 games. So to go from, and even before his 99-point season, he was an 84-point guy. So to go from 85 to 100 points essentially down to what he is now, it's been tough for Flames fans to see him kind of take a step back. But yeah, I mean, he's a guy that, he can put points on the board, and when he's playing at his best, and I know Flames fans might call me crazy for saying this, but he truly is like one of the best offensive players in the game when he is at his best. He really is, just based on like pure talent and skill.
He's gone, eh?
Yeah. Like just looking at the Flames on Cap Friendly right now. Yeah. Like, man, he's making 6.75 this year, and he just doesn't seem like a Daryl Sutter player, something we've also talked about. And he's going to want, I don't think Johnny Gaudreau is going to get like elite money on the open market, but this guy is clearly going to want a raise. He's probably going to want something in the 8 million-ish range. Maybe he'll get a little bit less than that, but yeah, like, is Calgary going to dish out that money when they got to pay Matthew Tkachuk?
Yeah. And not to sound all like Negativeville and Flames fans go nuts, like an American living in Calgary, it's like not shocking if he'd end up on an American team.
Yeah, if that dude wants to get out of there and go somewhere else, and maybe he just wants a fresh start. Right? Because he's gone through some shit there in Calgary where I think fans to a certain degree have turned on him a little bit because they just expect more out of him. So yeah, if I was to bet right now, I'd say that Johnny Gaudreau is not going to be a Calgary Flame a year from now.
Yeah, no, I think that's a slam dunk, Bruno. Yeah. But the two Reds, one not shocking at all, Milan Lucic, $8.5 million overpay over 2 years. According to Luszczyszyn's model, not shocking. He pretty well has Lucic as like an entry-level deal player at this point in his career. And the last one, and this one was really bad. And like, I probably would have said like, yeah, this is not a good deal, but this bad, I wasn't sure. He's Blake Coleman. He is Coleman at like an $8.3 million overpay over 6 years. Like the guy's making, I think, is it 5 million? Coleman's making
4.9.
Yeah. And he has him like about $3.5 million player. Like that was a gross amount. He also hates Rasmus Anderson. He has him as like a $7 million overpay over, I think he's got like 5 years left on his deal. So,
and Rasmus Anderson's a guy, like, watching him, I really like him. Mm-hmm. And I know like his numbers, I think his numbers haven't totally been there, but I actually really like him. It just based on the eye test.
Right.
But yeah,
he can skate and all that. Yeah.
Exactly. Right. But yeah, going back to like Blake Coleman for a second, this is what happens. A guy wins a couple Stanley Cups, shows that he's a perfect third line checking line guy who can kill penalties and do all kinds of things and be versatile and even play with the top players if he needs to. Guys like that are always overpaid. It was the same thing with Barclay Goodrow with the New York Rangers. Like, what the hell were the Rangers thinking, giving him a 6-year deal for $3.6 million? Like, those are guys that you just don't overpay. That's how teams get into trouble, right? So I totally agree with Dom Luszczyszyn in this case that Blake Coleman contract is bad, and it's probably going to continue to get worse. And maybe it's not going to be bad for the first year or two, but you go, 3-4 years down the line, you're probably going to regret that decision, I think, if you're Calgary.
Yeah, no, I mean, again, it's that whole thing when you see the numbers broken down, and it's kind of funny, like how it just works out where you see these numbers, like we mentioned with Tavares before, how it's like, okay, Dom has him at like, say, 9 million. It's like, yeah, like that's fair. Like, even just without doing any math or looking at any underlying numbers. And like, to your point about the guys in the Flames, like, yeah, they kind of make sense at those numbers, and they'd be nice additions at those numbers, or fair additions at those numbers, I should say. What's interesting, and like, I'm excited to see the comments of people, is the star players. Like how I said before, how like he has Matthews at like 17.5 million. Like he is Colorado. He said first place, absolute juggernaut. He has McKinnon's value around 16 million, Rantanen at 12 million, Landeskog at 9 million. He has Cale Makar's value at like 16 million a year.
Wow.
Like that good. Even Gerard, actually 9.5 million a year, and Devin Tays around 10 million a year.
Holy.
That's how good he thinks Colorado is.
Wow.
And it might be one of those things. And again, like, ask him how he does the model of like, is it because all these guys are good, and because they play together, everything gets kicked up by a certain percent because like everything's just going well all the time. You know what I mean? So I'm sure that ties in the model, even if he intends it not to. It starts to like completely avoid what's going on around the players. But yeah, like the star players in Dom's model get paid. And yeah, again, like the value thing is the discussion topic for sure. But moving on, we have the Edmonton Oilers at 13th. And the Oilers are an exciting one because you have some really good ones and you have some really bad ones. And I think people are already like, those names are flying in people's heads of like who's really good and who's really bad. At the top, guess who? Our boy, future Toronto Maple Leaf.
There you said.
Comment down below.
I was waiting for it.
How many years left on his 5 years left on his deal, everyone? That's the pay cut deal the superstar is finally going to take with the Toronto Maple Leafs. Connor McDavid at a $38.6 million surplus spread over 5 years. So according to Dom's model, you ready for how good Connor McDavid is?
Let's hear it.
He'd work out to about fair value at $20 million a year.
Just insane.
And again, it's like you see that number and you like burst out laughing, like, no, that's ridiculous. But then it's like, wait a minute, how many points did he get last year? And then if you cut that in half, how many points would that player get? And then it's the benefit of getting it from one guy. And then again, when we said before about how when McDavid's on the ice, the puck is always in the offensive end. So he is probably the best quote unquote defensive player in the NHL. So again, like when you see it like that, it makes sense, right? But Connor McDavid, man, that friggin' good.
Yeah, that dude's an alien. We've talked ad nauseum how good Connor McDavid is, but yeah, when you actually look at it on paper and you look at a model like Dom's and you see the value in Connor McDavid and how making $12.5 million a year, he's being underpaid by nearly $8 million a season.
Crazy.
Like, again, according to one model, this is not the be all and end all, but it really puts things in perspective and shows you how good a player actually is and how much value they're actually providing at their current salary.
Yeah, no, it's just, and again, like people talk about the eye test. Well, McDavid passes the eye test in flying colors.
Passes every test.
Yeah,
flying colors.
Crazy. Moving down the good deals, not shocking, Draisaitl. I assume this would be like one of the best ones in the league, and I'll raise my hand as like one of the people who, when like Draisaitl got that deal, I was like, that's horrible. Like that's a way overpay.
Oh yeah, you're not alone, Lepore. There's a lot of people.
I mean, that deal got people. A lot of people thought that was a deal that was going to kind of ruin the NHL, because like if Draisaitl got 8, like what are other guys going to get? And then now it's like every team in the NHL would take Draisaitl at $8 million. Like that's a joke.
Yeah, like Peter Chiarelli made a lot of shitty decisions as GM of the Edmonton Oilers, but signing Leon Draisaitl to that contract, got to give him credit there. That was an unbelievable decision by the Oilers at the time.
Good point. I've never kind of went in the mental direction to give Chiarelli credit for that one. But yeah, he has him at about a $23 million surplus over the 4 years, and fair value around $14 million a year, which again, like, with the best players in the league, like no one's making that kind of money now, but if they're an open market now, what they would get, contribution, it makes sense. This one, the next one, lots of discussion to be had with this one. Zach Hyman, somewhat shocking, I thought. And I think we'll both agree here that like nobody has a problem, or I'm sure very few people have a problem with Hyman's AAV. It's the term and what Zach Hyman is going to look like 3, 4, 5 years from now. But he has him at just under a $13 million surplus. It's fun. I just like looked at it and was shocked. Over the 7 years of his deal, I just got reminded that he was given a 7-year deal, and he is Hyman about fair value around $7 million a year. So,
which I think is an overpayment. That this is the one thing, one of the main things I disagree with in the model. And Dom wrote in the article, like he specified, he's like, listen, like when you compare Zach Hyman, because if you follow him on Twitter, when guys sign contracts, you know, not just him, but some of the other analytics guys, they'll come up with comparables and they'll show like 5 or 6 different guys from the past, not necessarily like one of Hyman's contemporaries, but even going back like 10 years from now, showing like similar players and how they aged. And he says that when you look at the comps, that this Hyman contract probably isn't going to age well, but based on the model, it looks like it's a good contract. And I get it. Like we've talked about this on previous shows. Like Zach Hyman, the last 3 years has been really good. He's third on the Leaf. He was third on the Leafs in goals per game.
Mm-hmm.
Like this is a guy that has proven that he can play with the top guys and be successful with the top guys on your roster. But it's like you said, Lepore, you go 3, 4, 5 years down the road, looking at a player that doesn't skate well, that doesn't have high-end offensive talent, right? So yeah, to be paying him $5.5 million, it's fine for the first couple of years. And yes, I think he's going to have a good season playing with McDavid and Draisaitl. But down the line, man, I don't see that as a good contract at all.
Like I was shocked and I wasn't. Like I was shocked to see it in the green. But again, like based on the AV, I'm like, okay, that's kind of fair. But then I wasn't shocked because like I know like all the underlying numbers guys love Hyman. Like every line he's played on does well and he makes players better and like he's good defensively, quote unquote. So like that on that end, I wasn't shocked, but I'm with you. Like, no, like everyone's shaking their head on that deal. But let's move on to the red ones for the Edmonton Oilers. None of these are shocking. None of these are shocking. Right off the bat, Zach Kassian, $8.4 million surplus over the next 3 years. That works out to what? Like my quick math here, like a $2.8 million surplus divided over the length of that contract. According to Dom's model, Zach Kassian doesn't deserve league minimum.
Yeah, he's
if I'm doing my math or around there. So like, not really surprising, but I know he had a few players like that who like, and again, people would say like, oh, this player, that player's worth that, but it's about wins above replacement. So I guess I'm somewhat guessing here, but I assume what the model means is like, okay, well, if I have an average NHL lineup out there and that average NHL lineup plays the entire 60 minutes, and then I remove one of those average players and insert Zach Kassian, his WAR is in the negative. So like my chances of winning go down. So it's like, that's why like that had this like negative, like the negative numbers come into play, like in this model. So like, that's like his point here where it's like this guy on the ice, like lowers your chances to win, like based on like what should be out there as like average NHL talent. Right.
Yeah, there's nothing to disagree with there with Zach Kassian. Like even just based on the eye test, like that dude just isn't a good player.
Yeah, there was one game against the Leafs, like 2 or 3 point blank scoring chances, and like missed all 3. I think even like 2 of them were passes from McDavid.
And that's the thing, like he's gotten so many opportunities to play with him. Even at the beginning of this season, he was on the first line with Connor McDavid. Crazy. Like if you're having trouble producing with Connor fucking McDavid, then I'm sorry, but you're just not a very good player.
Yeah. Other ones, again, we'll fly through them. Cody Ceci, not shocking. He has him at about a $5.5 million surplus over the 4 years of his deal. He has him at about I think like a $1.5 to $2 million player at fair value for Ceci, which I mean, as much as we shit on Ceci, it's like, if he's like a 5'6" defenseman making 1.5 or 2 million, like,
yeah, that's like, fine.
That's fine. Exactly. And again, like how the model you see it, and like, yeah, that makes sense. Like the problem with the Leafs that we were paying him 4.5. So it's like, yeah, you can't, like, it's way too much money. Duncan Keith, he has him at a $13.2 million surplus. He is Keith low, man. Like he thinks Keith is like at this point in his career, like a bad NHL player.
Yeah, like basically like below replacement level player.
Yeah, like really bad. And like we're all cheering for Duncan Keith. Like I friggin' love Duncan Keith. Like watching him with those Chicago teams when they were winning, like he was incredible. But man, it's rough to see. And then the next one, Bruno's favorite player, Darnell Nurse, a $41 million surplus. He has Nurse, again, quick math, at about a $4 million player in terms of value. So
making $9.25 million a season.
Yeah, like
now.
think of that, man. Like for that term, like, and again, like argue the model, whatever, but like if every player's treated the same, and we're seeing a lot of these deals and what he's saying like kind of makes sense. That guy's making more than double long term at that amount than what he deserves. Horrible, man.
And again, like before Oilers fans freak out on us, like we completely understand how good Darnell Nurse is. Like I think he's a really good player. He brings a lot to the table. Last year, he had a breakout season, scored a ton of goals, provides physicality. He's solid defensively, but why are you paying him $9.25 million? Why give him that extension?
Yeah.
Like, it's like, we get it. He's a really good player, but to pay a guy, that much money who's not an elite defenseman in the league. And maybe you disagree with me. Maybe you think Darnell Nurse is an elite defenseman. Maybe you think he's in the same category as Adam Fox and Victor Hedman and Cale Makar and guys like that. But I just don't think he is.
Yeah.
So
no.
yeah, that contract, I
his,
don't think is going to look very well down the road.
I don't know what other way to put it, but like, he does a lot of things, but he's not as tight as those guys are. I think people know what I mean. Like when you watch him, like you mentioned, like the Prongers before, and those guys, like when you watch him, like Lidstrom was like the model for this, where it's like no mistakes, solid every time. And like Nurse is more volatile, in my opinion, anyway. And which doesn't mean he's not a great player. It's just that like that type of money is like A+ defenseman money. And I just don't have him in that category. And apparently neither does Dom Luszczyszyn. That's pretty well a wrap with the Edmonton Oilers. But he actually, and this is kind of a talking point too, really quickly, he had Tyson Barrie like a pretty decent deal. So I mean, he scores, and again, like we talked about how like Dom loves the guys who get the puck at the other end. So I mean, we can debate all day about that one, but again, good for Tyson Barrie. He knows how to pick.
I have no problem with Tyson Barrie's contract.
Yeah,
like that's the one, and I know I ripped into the Oilers on the last episode. But yeah, the Tyson Barrie contract specifically, like I have no problem with $4.5 million for Tyson Barrie.
Mm-hmm.
He's a really good offensive defenseman. Obviously, like you said, has his defensive deficiencies, but you're not overpaying the guy, right? You're giving him what he deserves essentially. And like Dom is saying, he deserves even more than $4.5 million a season. So
yeah,
I think that's a solid contract for Edmonton.
There you go. And again, like relatively speaking, like you see what defensemen get in the league. This guy produces, like if he's your number 4 or something, it's like, yeah, it's not bad. Like it's like comparing, and he does the power play, all that stuff. So, but let's move on to the next Canadian team on the list, coming in at 19th place, Les Habitants de Montreal. And the Habs are a fun one. And this is the one too. Like, it's too bad he doesn't have a model for goalies, because like I'd love to see what he thinks about Carey Price, because like that would have made our podcast. Like that would have been 8,000 comments. We could talk for an hour on the value of Carey Price and wins above replacement, losses. When do people would say, oh, it's bullshit because the only wins that matter in the playoffs. Other people would say, well, you have to make the playoffs for those wins to matter, and he hasn't been the greatest during the regular season. So I'm disappointed this time anyway that goalies weren't included. But this one jumped out at me a bit, Gallagher. And somewhat not shocked at the same time, because I know a lot of the metrics guys love Gallagher. Like Gallagher's 5-on-5 numbers are amazing. Like I remember I think was it over the last, I don't know how long, he had the same amount of 5-on-5 goals as like Crosby. Like Gallagher.
Even if you go back over the last like 5 or 6 years, Gallagher is like, he's hovering around the top 10 in terms of like 5-on-5 goals. So I think that's why this model in particular ranks him out so good.
Yeah. And I think a lot of those guys too, like people looking at us saying numbers before, like this guy deserves 16 million, 17 million according to Dom's model. Well, to your point, Bruno, like it's because these guys produce 5-on-5. It's like 5-on-5 points are more valuable than power play points, not necessarily on the scoreboard, but the gap of like what it takes from like a player who can't produce 5-on-5 to who can, compared to say the power play. Like a lot of guys can produce on the power play. Not a lot of guys can produce 5-on-5.
Exactly. Yeah, that at the end of the day, that really just shows how good you are as a player, because that's when the playing field is even. No team is at an advantage or a disadvantage. How can you produce when all things are even and it's 5-on-5 hockey, right? And Brendan Gallagher, like you said, the analytics community loves this guy because he scores a lot of 5-on-5 goals. Simple as that.
Yeah. Next one, another one in the green for Montreal, not surprising at all, was from your Ottawa 67s, Tyler Toffoli at a $6.5 million surplus over 4 years. Not shocking at all. Toffoli's a great player. Contract. Everyone, it's not too often when a player signs a deal and everyone immediately is like, wow, that's a really good deal. Like everyone knew that one was the gem for Montreal. So yeah, he values Toffoli about a $6 million player. So again, not shocking. We'll quickly like fly through the Reds for Montreal. There are some talking ones here, man. So Byron, he has him as a $3 million surplus over 2 years, him about a $2 million player. Newly signed Mike Hoffman at a $4 million surplus over 3 years. So he has him at about like a $3.2 million player. Armia, a $4.8 million surplus, but like divided over 4 years. So it's not the end of the world. He has him about like $2 million player, $2.5 million player. Jonathan Drouin, not shocking, $6.8 million surplus with 2 years left on his deal, makes him about a $2 million player in Dom's eyes. These are two good ones. And like Montreal Canadiens fans, like let us have it. Let's tell us what you think about these ones. Josh Anderson. Okay. He has him at a $19 million surplus over the next 6 years of his deal. He is Anderson about a $2.5 million player. That sucks. I mean, if Dom's right, like that sucks. And again, the model, make of it what you wish, but when you're a winger and you're making that much money, like he doesn't get a lot of total points. So I'm sure that comes into play. And yeah,
and like even going through some of these negative contracts he talked about on the Habs, like I have no problem with the Mike Hoffman contract. I think he's a good player. He scores a ton of goals. Exactly. He's really good on the power play. And maybe it's because his 5-on-5 numbers aren't as good. Like Hoffman, you could essentially call him a power play specialist. Like that guy can rip it on the man advantage. So I really have no problem with Hoffman's contract, even if it's a slight overpayment. Armia, I'm kind of in the same ballpark. Like, okay, he's not nearly the goal scorer that Mike Hoffman is, but I don't have too much of an issue paying Armia $3.4 million.
Yeah, like, and his overpay wasn't
overpayment, but it's not bad.
Yeah, again, it was 4.8 divided by 4. He has him as like $1 million overpay. Yeah, so whatever. Yeah,
but yeah, the Josh Anderson one, man, that's you know
what? People would argue with that one though. Like people like him. I mean, he scored big goals in the playoffs. So,
but then he also went like multiple games without doing anything. Like
he had a span in the regular season where he went like, I'm just throwing out a number. It was like 20 something games with like 2 assists or something.
Yeah.
Like,
when you just look at his like raw production, like, man, he scored 5 goals in 22 playoff games, 5 goals and 1 assist. So he had 6 points in 22 playoff games. Again, this model, these rankings have nothing to do with power.
Sorry, Bruno. He had 1 assist in the playoffs.
Yes. Josh Anderson, 1 assist in 22 playoff games.
That's like hard to do. And like, you're a winger.
And he had 7 assists in 52 regular season games.
Even his goals, like how many goals do you have in the regular season?
He had 17 goals in 52 games.
Yeah, but he had like 6 in his first like 8 games, or he had like 12. Like they're all at the beginning. Like he went on a flyer. He was
so inconsistent. So in total, last year out of Josh Anderson, you got 22 goals in 74 combined games, regular season, playoffs, and that's fine. But when you're only getting 8 assists in 74 games, and you factor in how inconsistent he was last year, and you look at that contract, and I get it. He throws his weight around. He's an intimidating presence on the ice, but man, oh man, that's a lot of money to pay to a player. Like, for example, like he's getting Zach Hyman money, and Zach Hyman, he produces better than Josh Anderson. Say what you want about both players. Maybe you're an Anderson over Hyman guy, but just looking at the raw production, Hyman is a better point producer and goal scorer than Josh Anderson. He just is.
Yeah. No, it's that one to me. Like Anderson's a weird player. Like it's not too often there's a guy who like I understand someone really liking him and I understand someone really hating him. But he kind of falls in that category for sure. This one, and Montreal Canadiens fans are not going to be happy about this one. David Savard. Dom has him at just under a $10 million overpay over the 4 years. He has Savard essentially like a league min guy, like just above league min guy. Like they just signed him. And like to your point before about like what happens when you win Stanley Cups, your name gets out there and people jump on you. But Dom does not like
why people like David Savard, right? Like he's French Canadian. He's a right shot defenseman. They need someone to replace Shea Weber. So I get why, Habs fans are on board with this guy. And listen, like David Savard, I've watched this guy play, and you go back, maybe forget last year where I think the model is kind of bringing down his value a little bit based on what he did last season, even though he won the Stanley Cup, obviously, with Tampa. But he's a guy that's been on the decline, but he's a solid player. Like, he blocks shots, he hits guys. Like, he's a good, solid defenseman. But yeah, I mean, based on this model, like, it's an overpayment, and it's just it's not a good contract. And say what you want about, David Savard, but just looking at the numbers over the next 4 years, it looks like the Habs probably could have done a little bit better here.
Yeah. To your point about like right-handed, right shooting defensemen, it'd be fun to look at all of how Dom scored all the right-handed defensemen. Like, are they all overpaid or are they all fair paid? Like, it'd be interesting to see if everyone goes nuts for right-handed.
Yeah. Every right-handed defenseman this year is being valued like Connor McDavid. Like, it's actually like insane.
I tell my nephew, so like he always wants to play center because he likes to score and all that, but he shoots right. He loves rushing the puck, and he has a Swedish last name because of the family. I'm like, bud, you're going to be a first round draft pick at $5 million. I'm like, man. Just based on those right-handed defense, Swedish last name, first round draft pick, done. Never getting cut.
He's a lock to be a first round pick.
Yeah, guaranteed. And he does the Gretzky jersey talk. No influence on my end. No influence.
An absolute lock to go in the first round. Yeah. I can't wait, Lepore. When is he eligible? When is he draft eligible?
A decade. He just turned 9. So yeah.
Okay, we'll watch out for that.
Yeah, watch out for him. Next on the list, the Vancouver Canucks, who people love to talk about their contracts. Not a lot of good here, but he has a really good one. Connor Garland, $12.3 million surplus in value over 5 years. He is Connor Garland, like a $7 million player. I'm like, quick math. Okay. Like,
and I know a lot of people were happy with Connor Garland being included in that Coyotes deal. And listen, like, you look at his numbers last year, 39 points in 49 games. Year before that, 39 points in 68 games. He's a guy that's getting better. He's only 25 years old. I don't think he's a $7 million player, but I think maybe the way that Dom did this model, he's saying that over the course of his how many more years is he signed for?
He's got a 5-year deal.
Okay, so he's on a 5-year deal. So yeah, maybe over the course of the contract, he just views Garland as like, that's for $4.9 million over the next 5 years. I'm just looking at cap friendly right now. So yeah, I think he thinks that he's just going to continue to get better based on how he's progressed so far early in his career. But yeah, that's kind of a stretch to say that Connor Garland is a $7 million player. I think that's a little bit too high there, Lepore.
Yeah. I mean, after that, it's pretty well all negative for the Vancouver Canucks. Tanner Pearson, who I know Canucks fans love to hate on, $5.3 million overpay over 3 years. That makes him about a $1.5 million player. And here we go. So where it gets ugly for the Canucks. On D, you got Tucker Poolman, Tyler Myers, and Oliver Ekman-Larsson. According to Dom's model, these are like entry level players.
Yeah, that's a nightmare. He has them all as D contracts. Like, he graded them all like A, B, C. He's got them as D+, D-, D-.
And like, Poolman's got 4 years left. Myers has got 3, and Larson has how many years left? Like 17.
Yeah,
forever. Like,
he's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 more years at $7.3 million.
There you go. Like, brutal Vancouver. Oh my God. And that was a weird deal. Like, I mean, they got rid of a couple bad contracts to take on that bad contract. So debate all day about that one, Vancouver Canucks fans, and let us know what you think about what Dom Luszczyszyn thinks about the blue line in Vancouver. Beautiful city, though. Vancouver, beautiful city.
Yeah, and Lepore, it's going to get interesting there because they got to pay Pettersson, they got to pay Quinn Hughes.
That's the one.
And like, you're looking at comparables. I don't want to say Quinn Hughes is as good as Cale Makar. Let's say he's a tier below, Cale Makar, but I'm sure he's looking at that Makar contract and being like, I want something sort of in this ballpark. Like, maybe, not $9 million a year, but I want $7 to $8 million a year. And Pettersson, who's a phenomenal centerman, like, they got some money to dish out to these guys.
Yeah.
So having some of these terrible contracts on the books, especially on the back end, that's not a great situation. And I know a lot of Vancouver fans I've been frustrated with how Jim Benning has run this team and what they've been doing over the last few seasons, but
they hate him there.
Yeah, like, they got some star players up front and Quinn Hughes on the blue line, but you mix in some of these brutal contracts. And I know they got rid of some, bringing in Oliver Ekman-Larsson in that Coyotes deal, but man, they still got some issues on this cap sheet.
As far as the other big names on the Canucks, like Besser, JT Miller, like Bo Horvat, all those guys, he's pretty well got them as fair deals. So if Kazon is running about those names,
I totally agree with that.
Yeah, and those are, again, like, not shocked that you see how much those guys make, and yeah, that makes sense. Moving on lower in the Dom Luszczyszyn contract ranking standings, the Jets, 25th place in the NHL for their deals. And there was one here. This may have been the biggest shocker to me, like, coming from the Jets. We'll get to in a second. So he has Ehlers, an $11 million surplus over the 4 years of his deal. Yeah. So he has Ehlers is like an $8.5 million player, which is like, everyone loves Ehlers. Saw what he brought
an awesome
last
player.
Season. What a beast. Shifley in the green, not shocking, $4.1 million surplus over 3 years. He is him at about a $7.5 million player, which is interesting because, like, quick to people, and maybe it's like the Canadian thing bias, but like, Shifley or Ehlers, who do you want?
I would say Shifley, but
yeah, you'd say Shifley.
But then when you look at their, especially since Shifley's a centerman, but yeah, then when you look at like the underlying numbers and all the great things that Nikolai Ehlers can do, yeah, man, like, to me, it's still really close. And I get it. Like, the analytics community doesn't really like Mark Shifley.
Okay, I didn't know that. I've never really investigated him.
You're saying he's a $7.5 million player, but when you first think of Mark Shifley, like, got them into the conference finals, a few seasons ago, he's like a point a game player. You'd view him as like, he should be worth 8-9 million plus.
Mm-hmm.
But, according to this model, he's just not. He's like a $7.5 million player. But who would you rather have, Shifley or Ehlers?
I'm with you. Like, my brain immediately went to Shifley. That's biased because, like, his name is popularity, but I don't know, man. I think we're splitting. Okay, we're saying a $7.5 million player versus, like, essentially like an $8.5 million player according to Dom's model. But Ehlers is really good too. Like,
Ehlers is electric.
Yeah,
like,
great,
just like
awesome
like,
player.
Based on the eye test, like, watch a couple of Winnipeg's Jets games if you haven't had a chance to really watch Ehlers closely. Like, oh my God, this dude just jumps off the page. He's an awesome player. So yeah, I think he's definitely underpaid, and that's a really nice contract there for the Jets.
Yeah. So this is the one here that shocked me, that really shocked me. And this is the one, again, this is why these guys exist. These underlying numbers guys exist. Kyle Connor in the red.
Yes.
That one shocked me. He has a $4.5 million overpay over the 5 years. Again, he has him at, it's not that crazy. It could spread over the 5 years, but just weird to see him in the red. And he has him about a $6 million player. I think he's getting like a shade over 7. So, like, nothing crazy, but just like, I would have thought Kyle Connor at least fair deal. Like, with the last couple seasons he's had, like, goals are guaranteed with that guy. So
no, I completely agree. That was one of the ones that jumped out at me immediately. Like, just look at his numbers over the last 4 years: 31 goals, 34 goals, 38 goals, 26 goals in 56 games last year. Would have scored over 30 again. So this is a guy that essentially now for 4 years has been a 30+ goal scorer who is a beast at 5-on-5. I shouldn't call him a 5-on-5 beast, because maybe that's what's sort of knocking down his numbers a little bit. But
yeah, maybe.
I know that he, like, I'll go check his numbers real quick, Lepore. But man, like, this is like one of the best goal scorers in the league over the last 4 years. And, this model has him as a, like you said, like a 5-point-something million player.
Yeah, I think but like 6 million ish there. And again, like that thing I mentioned before about shooting talent, kind of like the other way of Mikheyev, how like Mikheyev's pumped up a bit because he lacks shooting talent.
Yeah.
Maybe Connor's the case where, like, he has really good shooting talent, but it's hard for them to get like a metric that combines the formula with shooting talent. But I mean, interesting. Like, I still love the player.
And I'm looking up his stats now. I was right. He has 90 even strength goals over the last 4 years. Good for 8th in the NHL.
There you go.
Over that span.
Dom. I don't know, man.
So yeah, that's definitely a little, I don't agree with that one. I think Kyle Connor at 7.1 is a really good contract, quite frankly.
Yeah. Moving forward, the rest of the Reds for Winnipeg, Lowry, just under an $11 million overpay over the 5 years. He has about $1 million player. Nate Schmidt, $7.9 million overpay over 4 years. He has him about, I believe that works out about a $4 million player. And Josh Morrissey, $37.2 million overpay divided by the 7 years. He does not like Josh Morrissey, man. He does not like Josh Morrissey.
Yeah, you know what? That also jumped out to me, not to the extent that the Kyle Connor one did. Like, I think Josh Morrissey is a good player, and you look at his point, and I think the reason the model is knocking him down so much is because this is a guy who's the quote unquote number one defenseman on Winnipeg, but he's miscast in that role. And I think, once Dustin Byfuglien just decided that he didn't want to play hockey anymore, Morrissey was thrust into that role, and he really isn't a number one defenseman. Like, he's a good player, but when you just look at his point totals, you want your number one D-man to be more of an offensive threat, like 21 points last season, 31 points the year before that, 31 points in 2019. So, like, he's just not a very good offensive player. When you watch him play, like, I think he's a smooth player. Like, he does a lot of good things, but I think it's just his offensive production, his lack of offensive production, I should say, that ranks him so poorly in this model.
Yeah. And again, like how it's tough to measure, like guys you're playing with, situations you're put in, like they do their best to tie that in. But like you said, if he's miscast and put in situations he shouldn't be in, like consistently, yeah, his underlying numbers are going to look terrible.
Then he's going to get exposed. Exactly.
Yeah. So, moving forward then to 27th place, the last Canadian team. We've made it, Bruno. We've made it. The Ottawa Senators. My hometown, Ottawa Senators.
Lepore's Ottawa Senators.
Yeah, the Sens are a different one because I'm sure a lot of these teams after we went through them, like you mentioned how Pettersson has to get signed. Like the Sens have a lot of entry level deal guys like Stützle. They got to sign Kachuk, Josh Norris. So interesting to see like how the Sens play forward contract wise, or if Dom does this every year. I don't know if he does. How the Sens will look moving forward. Colin White. That is the big one for the Ottawa Senators. Just under an $11 million overpay divided by the 4 years. He has Colin White at about a $2 million player, and he's making just a shade under 5. So again, those middle road contracts, those are what really hurt you. And again, 4 more years of that. And I mentioned, like, you got to sign Stützle. Like, if someone told you that Stützle is going to be like a 30-something goal scorer, 40 goal scorer, and it's going to want like 10, 11 million, like 2 years now, like I'd be like, okay.
Yeah, I would totally. I think Stützle is going to be a star player in the NHL.
So it's things like that make it tough. Some positives. He likes Victor Mete. Actually, he really liked Victor Mete. He liked the Zub deal. And even was it Del Zotto? I don't remember if he had Del Zotto as like a positive.
He's got Del Zotto as a slight negative. 1.7 million in the negative over 2 years.
Okay, so yeah, but again, it's only he's only making what though, like 2 million.
He's only making $2 million a year. Del Zotto.
So essentially, he's saying he's like a $1.12 million player,
which makes sense for Michael Del Zotto. Like he's a good, solid, like third pairing guy, right?
Yeah, this one here, like this one is something like, and again, like the comments, like let us know what you feel about this one. Thomas Chabot, he labeled his deal, and just shocking to see, like Thomas Chabot contract grade C-. And like we've talked about Chabot a lot on the show, how much we love the player. He has him at a $10.5 million overpay divided by the 7 years of his contract, which puts Chabot at about a $6.5 million player, making $8 million. And it, again, like to what we said about like guys you're playing with situations, Dom in his quick little blip about the Sens wrote that like it could be like a talent around them thing, that like, again, these guys do their best to shut all that stuff out and be able to look at each player individually, regardless of the team they play on. But he did acknowledge that may have come into play with Thomas Chabot. And that's like one of the eye test guys for Chabot. Like I know like last year, like he was playing those crazy minutes and he was probably exhausted and he got exposed a lot. And he hasn't, I think Sens fans, I don't want to say like disappointed, about Shabbat's last season, but like based on like his rookie season or like his second year, and even like I remember when they signed him for $8 million, everyone was like, wow, that's reasonable. Like everyone thought that deal was going to be a gem for the Ottawa Senators. And I'm not saying that it won't be in the future, but I just think if the Sens had to give a grade to Thomas Chabot last year, not necessarily on the way he played, but based on their expectations of the player, I don't think they would have given him like the best grade. And like, it's big discussion topic because I'm sure people would say like Smith didn't use him right. He doesn't have a partner. He's playing too many minutes. So again, that's why this stuff is fun though, right? Because we can look at something, look at a number and talk about it for hours.
Exactly. No, I think Thomas Chabot definitely had an underwhelming season last year. Just looking at his numbers compared to what he's, done over the last couple of years, specifically the season he had in 2019, 14 goals, 55 points. And yeah, you could argue that maybe 8 million is a little bit too much for him, but he's another guy. And Dom wrote about this in his article, like guys can grow into these contracts. So
Sure.
Even though a contract might not look great right now, especially for some of these younger guys that, come out of their ELCs and they sign like these long-term contracts, like Chabot's a guy that I believe in. Like, I think he's a really good player. I think he's going to grow into this. And, you could maybe say it's a little bit of an overpayment, even over the next, whatever it is, 7 years. But Lepore, let's say he performs like a $7 million defenseman.
Yeah.
Right. It's like, you're fine with that. You're overpaying the guy by a little bit, but if he's going to return value and perform like, you look at other comparables around the league, I don't have them off the top of my head, but other $7 million players, specifically on the blue line, if he's going to give you that, then I think as a Senators fan, you're fine with that. And you're happy for the most
And again,
part.
like Dom, he makes 8. Dom's model saying he should get around 6.5. And he's acknowledging like, yeah, he doesn't have a partner, like the surroundings aren't good.
Yeah,
so.
It's like you said, his situation isn't good. Like just that team, offensively, what he has to work with, and especially what he has to work with on the blue line as a partner throughout the season. Like, yeah, that's a dude where like you put him, for example, like imagine like Thomas Chabot on like the Colorado Avalanche.
Yeah, exactly.
Then this contract probably looks like almost closer to an A contract.
Yeah. So. And again, how it'd be interesting how Dom, I'd love to ask him like how that ties in. The last one for the Sens, and not shocking at all, red. Nikita Zaitsev, just under a $15 million overpay.
Disaster.
Divided by 3 years. So he actually has, like Dom kind of makes a joke in his article saying that like, I can't put a player like negative in the way of like, I think he actually did say like Zaitsev should be paying the Senators to play for them. Again, that whole wins above replacement thing. Like if you have him on the ice, like your chances of winning go down. But it's the Zaitsev one and the Colin White one that are putting the Senators in 27th place. And again, those middle to low guys, like paying those guys that kind of money. And again, the Sens are fun. They're fun to talk about because they have all those young kids, and we'll see how this develops in the next couple of years. But as of today, Belmosision's not the biggest fan of how the Ottawa Senators are built.
Yeah, the Senators they're down there in the rankings, 27th overall. But just when you look at their cap sheet in general, and you just see how much cap space they have and how they really haven't committed big money to anyone other than Thomas Chabot. I mean, I know Matt Murray's making $6.25 million over the next 3 years. So that's a little bit of an issue, considering how that guy has been trending. He does not look good. But again, goalies aren't involved in this model. But yeah, the Senators as a whole, I know they're ranked 27th, but I think there's a lot of positive things going on there. And I don't think it's a situation where you look at the ranking and you go, oh, this team is screwed. Like they're in a bad spot.
Yeah. And that's the thing with these models. Like, and he's like, again, like think of the thing we just had, Bruno. He's ranking the teams and he didn't include goalies. So like the rankings are themselves, like head to head, are kind of irrelevant. It's just like, every team's on the same playing field. We're just ranking them without goalies. And then the other argument comes in, well, this team has 3 guys or 4 guys on ELCs that are going to be great players. But I guess that doesn't mean they're going to get good contracts, but people know where I'm going with that. Like it's not as grim as it may appear if a team's near the bottom of this list.
Exactly. No, that's perfectly put.
Yeah.
All right, Lepore. Well, before we end this thing off, you want to quickly have a conversation about the Amazon doc?
Well, Do I want to, or are we going to? Because I don't want to, Bruno.
We have to. I don't think I want to either, but we got to talk about this, Lepore. So
yeah.
So yes, as you, well, I mean, I hope you know at this point, because it's been all over social media. You know, they were talking about it even before the season. So Amazon Prime Video did a behind the scenes thing with the Leafs this year, you know, following their entire season from beginning to end. And they are going to come out with a 5-part documentary, and it's all going to be dropped on Amazon Prime on October 1st of this year.
Awesome.
And Canadian actor Will Arnett is the narrator. I think that's a pretty solid narrator for this. Yeah, but
why not?
Yeah,
we weren't available, so they got him.
Yeah, maybe we'll be on the next one if that ever happens with this disaster of a franchise. But no, yeah, I mean, they're going to go behind the scenes for the Leafs and their dumpster fire end to the season, losing to the Habs in the first round of the playoffs after having a 3-1 lead. But Lepore, are you excited for this? Because I'm pretty fired up, man. Even though the Leafs lost in, like I said, embarrassing fashion, I still want to see all the shit that went down behind the scenes.
So think of what you just said, Bruno, about how like you really want to see all this stuff and you really want to watch it. How many times have we made the point on this podcast since we started it that we picked the perfect name?
Yep.
Because we are going to be glued to this thing and just putting ourselves through like torture, like watching this thing. And you know, there's going to be that thing in you. And this always happens when you watch like old sports stuff that doesn't go your way. You're watching it and you're hoping for a different ending. Like, you know what happens, but then you're just like, maybe no. And then it doesn't happen.
Yeah, you're like, maybe
the Leafs
doesn't get injured.
You get reminded like, yeah, no, they didn't. And it's going to be so brutal. It's going to, like, you know, just when like we're getting into summer now, let's talk about the new season. Let's get reminded of what happened last year. It's going to suck for Leafs fans to put themselves through that, but we're all going to. They chose the Toronto Maple Leafs for a reason, because they knew it was going to be awesome and everyone was going to watch, or it was going to be terrible and everybody was going to watch. But like, what's going to be so bad is like, they're going to take snippets from all over this thing, and it's going to be like memes, GIFs, like
memes galore from this thing.
Every quote, every comment, like it's just going to be like the party to make fun of the Toronto Maple Leafs. But to my point though, like the haters are going to watch it too. The haters can't wait to watch.
The haters are going to be all over this, Lepore, because they're the ones who are going to be posting all the memes and GIFs throughout the season. Because you already know this thing's coming out October 1st. The Leafs open the season on October 13th against the Habs. The haters are going to have the memes and GIFs ready to go for whatever happens this season with the Toronto Maple Leafs.
Imagine you were a Habs fan.
Oh,
I'd be glued to this thing if I was a Habs fan.
Habs fans are going to love this.
They're going to,
they're going to love watching this team crash and burn.
When does it air? Like, what are the weeks I have to stay off Twitter?
Yeah. So it's October 1st, and all the episodes are dropping at the exact same time. Shot. So it's like Netflix, essentially, when they drop a series and it all comes out at once. So yeah, I'm going to be binging it, Lepore. I think I might watch all 5 episodes, Bruno, back to back.
Maybe we'll do a live, you and I watching it together.
Oh, I like where you're going with that, man.
Might be fun.
A live viewing party. I think it probably drops right at midnight, right? How about a GFP from midnight to 5 a.m. viewing party of the All or Nothing Leafs Amazon doc? Who wants to see that?
Yeah, who wants to see me and Bruno just like cry and like be devastated and have our face in our hands, just like looking at the television screen in devastation and can't without any ability to understand what has happened.
Gluttons for punishment, man. Gluttons for punishment.
That's what it should have been called. That's not
for real.
That's what they should have called the documentary.
What a missed opportunity by
All
Amazon.
or Nothing. Or I was saying, and I'm sure the joke's already been out there. The Toronto Maple Leafs, nothing. That should have been the title. But can't wait. Thanks, Amazon. Can't wait.
It's going to be awesome. You know, like I said, despite the Leafs crashing and burning and having another embarrassing first round exit, people are going to be glued to this thing.
Oh yeah.
And like you said, Lepore, especially the haters. the memes, the GIFs. I mean, Twitter is just going to have an absolute field day with this documentary. So October 1st, you're not going to want to miss it. And I promise the GFP podcast, whether we're doing a live stream or whether we're recapping the series, we are definitely going to have some content on this all or nothing Toronto Maple Leafs Amazon doc. But Lepore, before we wrap up this podcast, any final thoughts?
Not really, man. But to be honest, I don't know if I've ever been so excited to scroll through the comments of our video, because we broke down all the Canadian teams, talked about contracts, again, using Dom Luszczyszyn's model, not Bruno and I's model, on how he judged those contracts. And there's a lot of debate within those contracts and a lot of different ways teams can go to improve those things and get worse for that matter. So yeah, I'm intrigued to know what fans think about like what we listed.
Yeah, same here. And like Lepore mentioned throughout the podcast, please comment down below. Give us your thoughts on what you think of these rankings from Dom Luszczyszyn of The Athletic. He ranked all the teams in the NHL based on the value of their contracts. We went through all the Canadian teams. So we would love to hear your thoughts on specific players or just your favorite team in general and where they fall in the rankings. But that's going to do it for episode 32 of the Gluttons For Punishment Podcast, or GFP, a Toronto Maple Leafs and NHL podcast hosted by Michael Lepore and Anthony Bruno. Once again, if you enjoyed listening to the show, it would be a big time help if you give us a 5-star rating and review on Apple. And if you're watching us on YouTube, we would appreciate it so much if you hammer that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell so you know exactly when the GFP podcast is posting some new content. So for Michael Lepore, I'm Anthony Bruno, and we will see you in the next one.
Thanks, everyone.